Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name's Matthew from Vinzero HK, and welcome to our first of many webinars of Bimbeats. Vinzero HK and Bimbeats have partnered so we can offer our clients to improve health of projects, people, and business. Matt Walsh from Bimbeats will be presenting examples of how Bimbeats can provide the opportunity to reduce their downtime, increase productivity through real-time data. So welcome, Matt, and over to you, mate.
Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. Let me access the PowerPoint and away we go. So yeah, the topic of the webinar is what is Bimbeats and what problems does it solve? So for those of you that aren't aware of what Bimbeats is basically a data pipeline that extracts data from your CAD and BIM tools and other applications to get real-time data insights with the opportunity across all projects to reduce downtime and increase productivity. So who are Bimbeats? So if you're familiar with the AEC space and innovation in Australia, you're probably familiar with the guy on the left. So that's Adam Sheether, who is one of the co-founders of Bimbeats, and he's based in Australia in Brisbane. And he founded Bimbeats with Conrad Sobin. So Conrad is basically if you can imagine, the equivalent of Adam in Chicago. Those two guys are part of a group called the Bad Monkeys. They've always been pushing the boundaries of what we can do with technology within the AEC space. And if anyone on the call is a user of Dynamo, you're probably very well aware of the package called Archilab, for which Conrad is the creator. And with Archilab and a number of other packages that Conrad produces for Dynamo, they've now been downloaded by over 500,000 people. So the tools that these guys are building are very popular within the industry. So they've got a lot of credibility around understanding the data because they were both in the industry as engineers and architects. And working in that space for large organizations. So they really understand the problems that are faced by you guys on the calls. And they obviously understand how to build the tools to solve those problems. Now, from my point of view, I was a former structural engineer and technician at Arup for around 20 years in the UK and Australia. And then I showed an interest in understanding how technology could provide the opportunity to reduce downtime and increase efficiency, and started working with Adam 3 or 4 years ago when I moved to BVN Architects, where we really wanted to understand how our projects were performing, the competencies of our users, and really get to the bottom of understanding where the inefficiencies were in delivering our projects. So the problems that we're trying to solve, and I think these problems are probably common amongst everyone on the call, fees are getting tighter. So if fees are getting tighter, how can we look at opportunities to reduce the duplication of effort across our projects and identify how we can scale pockets of innovation? So we know that there's some good stuff being carried out within organizations, but typically it's only happening on 1 or 2 projects or in 1 or 2 heads. So we'll show through these examples how Bimbeats gives the opportunity to identify those pockets of innovation and scale it across the entire business. Staff wellbeing and retention is a hot topic at the moment. So understanding how we can provide a better environment for our people to work in by looking at the tasks they're carrying out and giving them the opportunity to work out ways to become more productive and more efficient, to give time back to them to do the things that are really important to them and do meaningful tasks. So this is really an opportunity to do an Are You OK digital footprint. In terms of managing CapEx and OpEx of IT spend, Bimbeats captures software use across all platforms, not just your CAD and BIM tools. So this provides the opportunity to manage licenses across all of your suite of tools and really drill down into why crashes might be happening across your suite of tools to get to the root cause of understanding what that might be, whether that's the infrastructure that the software is sitting on, what the user's doing, or what the model is doing. So Revit productivity has been a hot topic as well over the last few years. We're all probably well aware that Revit isn't going to be rebuilt, so we've got to make do with the tool as it is. And Revit can be used in many different ways, and a lot of those ways are very inefficient and cause a lot of downtime. So Bimbeats is able to capture what is good practice, but also quantify what good practice means to a business. So when you do the right thing, how much time and money does that save? So the reason that we created Bimbeats and why we're slightly different to potentially other solutions that are out there And from my point of view, when I was at BVN, I was using Dynamo to extract the health of the models, but it wasn't scalable, and I could only do this on a few select projects. And it was creating Excel files, and those Excel files I was pushing into Power BI. And it was useful information, but it wasn't scalable across the entire business. And it was literally pulling out the health of the model. It wasn't looking at the time tasks were taking to complete, and it wasn't looking at how we could scale this across the entire business and look at how users were interacting with that data. So Bimbeats is really this solution that combines model health, the health of people, i.e. how many hours they're working, and trying to find opportunities to reduce that time, and understand how we can do this across all projects for the health of the business. So when we started out with Bimbeats, it was really focused on automating that process of creating the health of the model and extracting that in real time across all projects. But when we started analyzing the data after a year or two of working with some large organizations, we realized that it extended far beyond just the health of the model. And it was also really important to understand when software developers were being brought in to automate scripts, or when you were purchasing tools to improve productivity, so Revit add-ins as an example, what was the return on investment of that development? How much was it costing to develop those tools, and how frequently were they being used? So some of the insights that we were finding with Bimbeats originally was that these tools were being developed and they were only really being used on a few projects with a few users. So being able to expose who those users were across the entire business to be able to identify training opportunities was a massive win for Bimbeats. So that was combining what the users were doing in their competency and understanding their competency, but providing opportunities to train them to upskill them. And then it went really beyond just the technical groups, from an exec and a project manager and IT manager level, of really getting a good understanding of the entire digital footprint of your business, identifying where those innovation pockets were happening, and looking at the health of people and projects and ultimately the business. And from a project manager's perspective, understanding and tracking the delivery of your project. Was it tracking on time? How many hours are actually being spent to complete tasks versus what's on a timesheet was really important. And then from the IT side of things, like I kind of already mentioned, the performance of the hardware, is it performing as expected? Is the software being utilized as expected? And comparing the cloud and network infrastructure, which we'll go into in a bit of detail. So if we break that down and look at some of these examples, this is a dashboard that we provide, and this is all out of the box, around understanding application use across your entire organization. So on this dashboard, it's been broken up by the Microsoft suite, CAD and BIM tools, the Adobe suite, but this can be any suite of tools that are used within your organization. So as an example, this week I set up a dashboard for a client that has all of their structural engineering tools listed so that they can understand who's using those tools and when, to be able to manage licenses and obviously, again, understand how those tools are being used. And a great example of how many of our clients are using this dashboard is to identify who's using the Adobe suite of tools when they're really just using Acrobat Reader and paying for the suite of tools, as well as Bluebeam. So are people using Bluebeam to just read PDFs rather than using the functionality that Bluebeam needs, again, to address that issue of getting the right amount of licenses that you need within your organization across any tool. When we look at the performance of your network to BIM 360 as an example, within Revit, because we understand whether a file has been used from your internal network or BIM 360, we can really get some very great insights around how long things are taking to happen in both of those environments. So this is an example of a company that was looking to move to BIM 360 when Brisbane went into lockdown in January this year. And they ran a study in Bimbeats to compare how long it was taking on average to synchronize a file in their network compared to how long it was taking to synchronize a file on BIM 360. Now, in this example, they were able to demonstrate that BIM 360 was 20% faster. So with that in mind, they were able to go to leadership and say, here's an opportunity for us to move all of our files to the cloud because we're not getting a detrimental performance effect by moving those files to the cloud, and we get all of the other benefits that BIM 360 offers. But this is interesting because when we look at two other companies that tried exactly the same process, they actually showed a 2.5 times slower synchronization time when they moved to BIM 360. So having Bimbeats as a tool to be able to identify whether or not that's working for you as a business can support potential anecdotal evidence where maybe a group of people are saying, oh, I think since we've moved to BIM 360, I feel we're quicker or slower, but also be able to drill right down to understand, is it a project that's suffering? Is it a user that's suffering? Or is it a particular infrastructure that user's using that is contributing to these numbers? So one of the best features that Bimbeats has is the ability to alert users or teams, and the alert can get sent to any group of people that you want, but to identify things that are really critical to your business that are going to affect downtime. So this is actually an example of an alert I set up when I first moved to Bimbeats, when my machine was exceeding 90% utilization for memory. So I had a machine that was 16 gig of RAM. I was regularly in Revit and using Power BI, and my machine was struggling. So what I did was I set up this query within Bimbeats to say, every time my memory goes over 90% utilization, send Adam a message so that he gets the idea that I need more RAM. So after getting sent this 10 times within the first week of me joining Bimbeats, Adam purchased 32 gig of RAM for me. So that was great. But the example here is that you can set this up for any alert that you want to be able to identify when key activities are happening and be able to address them as and when they happen, rather than find out about them like 1 or 2 weeks down the track. So an example of how we capture what's happening within Revit from a crashing point of view, this dashboard is very busy, but what it's showing you is automatically we capture when a fatal or unrecoverable error occurs, on which machine that has occurred, how long that machine has been up and running, how long Revit has been up and running, how many sessions of Revit were running at the time, and what the machine was doing at the time in terms of its CPU utilization and memory utilization. Now, because all of this information is captured in real time and is live and it has no manual intervention, what I did with this data when I was at PBN was say, okay, I'm not necessarily going to understand every single crash or investigate every single crash because I don't have time to do that, but I can start building trends around, is it the same user? Is it the same model? Is it because they're in multiple sessions of Revit? Is it because the memory's been overutilized? And to be able to do that, I was able to get to the bottom or the root cause of quite a few of the crashes to identify how can I prevent that from happening again. So the fact that this is capturing this data in real time obviously reduces the time to manually write a ticket and investigate that problem by the IT team, but also get this trending metrics to understand the root cause of why something might crash. So if we move on to looking at how Bimbeats benefits people, we have what's called the wellness dashboard. And what the wellness dashboard allows us to do is take a snapshot of any period of time and understand within the entire business who's working on the weekend, who's working in the middle of the night, and what are irregular patterns of work. So we're obviously all aware that we now do probably a combination of working in the office and working from home. But when you're working from home, how do you know how many hours somebody's spending working? Because when you're physically in the office, you can see people when they come in and when they leave. But because we now have the ability to work from home at any time, the data that we're capturing in Bimbeats with our existing clients is showing that on average, people are spending more time working than they did pre-COVID. Now, the idea with this dashboard isn't to check up on people to make sure that they've done their 8 hours a day or whatever they're contracted to do. The idea with this dashboard is to drill down and find out who are repeatedly working long hours, what tasks are they carrying out, and can some of those tasks be either delegated to someone else or is there an automation routine for that? So a great example of this dashboard was a month or so ago, I identified a user with one of the businesses that I consult to who was regularly doing 50 plus hours a week. And then I was able to look at the activities that that user was doing. And in that particular example, they were doing room layout sheets where they were opening the entire sheet in Revit rather than the individual view. And because Bimbeats captures how long it takes to open views and open sheets, I was able to say, well, that week you spent 4 hours just opening sheets. Whereas if you would have just opened the view, that time would have been a fraction of those 4 hours. But the most important part about all of this was around the communication of that message. So this wasn't a message that popped up on the screen and said, do not do this, do this. And I'm telling you what you're doing is wrong and you should be doing this. There is an empathetic part to Bimbeats that is around how you have that conversation. So that conversation was, I understand that you want to see the entire sheet when you open up that view because you want to get the context of that view, but maybe you could have a PDF open on another screen to get the whole sheet and just open up the view to save time. So once that conversation had been had, that user then went to just open the views, and then they saved that 2 or 3 hours a week by not opening the sheet each time. So extending that from the wellness dashboard, we can look at competency profiling. And this is just an example of what I call selective use commands within Revit. So because we process the journal file in real time, we can get a list of all of the actions carried out by all of the users at any time. So with this in mind, if I look at this particular dashboard, I can say, okay, who is regularly creating masking regions? Who's regularly exploding CAD files? Who's regularly doing tasks that I consider selective use, and be able to drill down and identify a group of people that you could then run a training session with to say, okay, there's a better way of doing this thing. You may not have been shown how to do it, but this data allows us to group people and provide training opportunities for those people that may not know that there's a better way of doing something. And equally, with the advanced competency dashboard, we can look at who's doing the really innovative things, who's using Rhino inside, who's frequently using Dynamo, who uses global parameters. Like, who are the people within your organization that are really understanding how to use these tools and are the super users? And can we pair those super users with the novices to transfer those skills on the job? So this dashboard here is showing the tasks or the actions that are being carried out over a given period of time, but we can drill down into that to look at how many users are doing those tasks. So here I've drilled down for a particular time frame, and the users are along the bottom. So I'm saying, well, this person here is frequently using all of these advanced tools. So there's my super user. That's someone I can identify with to put on a project with someone who might need a bit more extra help. So in terms of the add-ins within Revit, because again, we're tracking every button that's pressed and every tab that's executed, we can get a really good understanding of how your add-ins are being used and whether they are being used consistently across the business, or where, again, you have super users and novices. Now, in the majority of cases, that is what happens, but being able to identify which users should be using the tool to automate a process or become more efficient with that process, you can pair those people up on a project. Or in this example, if you look at the end of Q3, on this particular example, Ideate came into this business and run some lunchtime sessions, and you could see the spike of the number of people using the tools after the session was conducted. And then at the end of Q4 or the end of Q3, it dropped off again. So you know when you need to go back in to revisit that training. Here's an example of how that dashboard works. So you can filter either by the feature within the add-in or the user. So here we're just searching for BIMlink, and we're applying that over a given period of time. And we're saying, right, okay, now I can understand which users have used that particular tool over which time frame. So we can get drill down into the user, the feature, and any given time frame, all in real time. So identifying and prioritizing digital initiatives. Now, again, this is a very, very busy dashboard, but it's a very simple way of understanding duplication of effort across all of your projects. So what we're looking at here is all of the views that are in all of the Revit models under any project name that can be drilled down to understand how much time is being spent in each of these views. Now, what I've done on this particular dashboard is drill down to say, I only want to look at views that are called typical or views that are general notes over any given period of time. So with that in mind, I can then see how much time has been spent on typical details and general notes within that business over that time frame, on which projects and which users. So the opportunity here is to identify which user and which project has the most duplication of effort and pull all of those details into a single file so that you're not duplicating that effort on multiple projects. So if we look at the bottom here, you can see that typical suspended slab is being repeated over and over again. Now, knowing that and the amount of time that's being spent in all of those views, there's obviously an opportunity to reduce that duplication of effort through the data that we're capturing in the views and the sheets. So here's another example just of how you can track that when you're looking at, say, a commercial tower. Now, what I would expect to see within this dashboard is as I'm progressing up the tower, the time I'm spending to document the upper levels is less than the lower levels because a lot of that information will have already been repeated or duplicated in the lower levels. Now, if that's not the case, then this provides an opportunity to investigate that project to identify what's happening to mean that it's taking as long to document the levels as you go up the building, rather than having a reduced time to document as you go up. So understanding the uptake of automation, this one is really, really critical in terms of improving efficiency. So this business here had a series of, I think, 50 Dynamo scripts that they were running. And the way that they educated their team on this was each week, the leader of the BIM team would run a training session on how to use each of these Dynamo scripts. And then they used Bimbeats to make sure that those scripts were being used on every project with every user for that task, because obviously the automated way of doing it through Dynamo was a far more efficient way than the manual way. So they were able to track this with Bimbeats and identify how much time and money they were saving by every time they ran the automated version, compared it to the manual task, and come up with a number of how much time and money that they were saving the business. So just jumping onto the alerts. Now, the alert I showed earlier was around memory utilization, but this is just an example of someone coming in and modifying your company view template. So coming in and changing one of those view template settings. Now, you've seen that pop-up has just come up to say that Elasticsearch Query has just realized that there's been a view template visibility override. So anything that you want that's critical to your business and a standard that the way your business works, you can set up an alert to inform a group of people that that thing has happened. So in this particular example, it would go to the BIM manager potentially, or design technology leader, and that design technology leader would be able to collate all of these alerts and then use this again as a training opportunity. And it could be that that user didn't realize that or didn't know how to use the view template, or that the view template or the company template actually needs updating because it doesn't do what it needs to do for that particular type of view. Now, when you start getting this information in over a long period of time, you really get a great understanding from an organizational level where time is spent. So what we're looking at here is how much time was spent in reinforcement plans and post-tensioning. So this organization looked at this data and said, wow, we're spending 30 or 40% of our time just doing post-tensioning and reinforcement. What tasks are we doing in that space that could be automated? So that they looked at this and they found out that it was mainly when they were moving information from the analysis model into Revit. So they brought the software developer in, they worked out a routine to extract the PT and the reinforcement from the analysis and pushed it into Revit. Now that one change alone saved $10,000 per technician per year by identifying and understanding where time was being wasted, automating that task, and then making sure everybody was doing that same task in the automated way. So communicating these insights to stakeholders at all levels is really important. So we integrate with Power BI. So the dashboard that you're seeing here is the standard dashboard that Autodesk provide, but we have the equivalent of this with our Bimbeats data that allows you to drill down on any project at any time to get a traffic light system of what is considered good and bad practice. So a project leader could look at that first screen and just go, is it all green? Great, everything's tracking well. And if it's yellow, maybe something should be addressed. And if it's red, that there's an action probably needs to be performed to reduce that thing. Now, what we've been working on in the last 6 months is understanding what is Revit best practice. So as an example, if you compact the central file regularly, we now know that on average that saves around 10% of the file size. And we also know when a file size is of a certain size, how long it takes to open and sync on average. So we now have metrics around what best practice actually means in terms of time and money, and what are the contributing factors to how long it takes to open a model, how long it takes to save a model. So this is insights that we just didn't know until we started extracting this data and benchmarking it with Bimbeats. So as well as sharing that with project leaders in maybe Power BI, if that's what they're familiar with, we also can embed these dashboards into Teams channels. So this is an example where the drafting team or the BIM team, they're fully aware of how their models are performing at any time. And it's totally transparent. This isn't data that's just sitting inside a BIM manager's head. This is fully transparent across the entire team so that they can all contribute to making those projects better by reducing, in this case, it's yellow, green, and black, reducing those black metrics to improve productivity of those projects. So project management dashboards, we have a feature called Active Window, which basically takes a snip of your screen every minute. And what this enables us to do is really have a good understanding of what your actual timesheet is, rather than the kind of fictitious one that you make up at the end of the week to just try and work out where you'd spent your 40 hours. And I'm not suggesting that this can be integrated into a system that automatically invoices people depending on what you've done. But at least the way I use this is at the end of each week, I know exactly where I have spent my time. And then I can really drill down and understand how that time can be distributed in a timesheet. And particularly around variations, to be able to say, well, okay, I know how much time I've spent in these particular views. And those particular views were for that variation where the architect moved something, and we need to record the effect of that for us as a business. Drilling down into more detail, we have a feature called Snapshot, which does a deep dive into the models that extracts the parameters and the parameter data. So what we're looking at here is extracting the sheets and the phase that each of those sheets are on to be able to get an understanding of how we're tracking with regard to invoicing and project completion. So this would look at all of the packages of work that need to be delivered and how far they're progressing from preliminary to tender all the way through to construction, and being able to tie that to invoicing. And we also integrate with Deltek Vision. So we can actually identify the project ID number in any of the CAD and BIM tools and link that to Deltek Vision to be able to have that information linked to your project management software. Here's just another example of extracting all of the quantities from a project. And in this particular example, the columns went from in situ to precast, which was a variation. But this was a way of demonstrating that the model had been updated from in situ to precast to be able to claim variation, that work had been completed. So some frequently asked questions that we typically get asked when we've done a demo is, okay, that's great, you're showing a lot of information on Revit. And the reason that we do that is because most of our clients, we work with, identify and understand the problems within Revit, but we also go across all of these tools. So the uptake of Rhino and Grasshopper is particularly useful at the moment. There's a lot of organizations really getting into that space. And again, measuring your digital transformation strategy. So it may be that you're investigating these tools and you want to understand, are they performing better? And if they are, how you're going to scale that. So Revit, Dynamo, Rhino, Grasshopper, the CAD suite of tools, Navisworks. We obviously look at what the PC is doing. We have a Bluebeam log parser as well, so we can understand what's happening in Bluebeam. And we also process IFC, BCF, and model checker files up into our database. So all of that information is stored in one central cloud location. And we also process information about BIM 360. So I kind of alluded to this earlier about we know whether a file is on BIM 360 or within your network, but we also process what's happening within the admin portal. So we know information about when people are added to projects and removed from projects, etc. And there's a plugin called Tally for Revit, which does embodied carbon, and we capture all of that data as well. So the technology that we use is called the Elastic Stack, and I haven't gone into too much detail about that, but can do if anyone wants to ask further questions around that. But that technology is used by these organizations, and they use the Elastic Stack to process servers and process servers at a very, very fast rate, far quicker than what we need to do by processing log files and what the user's doing within the software. Here's some of our current customers. So from this list, I hope you can see that we're not just a small business servicing small companies. We're now working with some of the largest engineering and architectural practices in the world, and we're getting some great insights from these guys. So benchmarking what good practice is really, really enabling us to understand and drill down into what are the key things you as a business need to focus on to improve productivity and reduce that downtime. So some testimonials and awards from our clients. I guess this just reinforces some of the things that I've demonstrated in some of these dashboards, but it's really giving businesses this much more transparent approach to understanding how their projects are being delivered and not just listening to anecdotal evidence about whether something's slow, whether something regularly crashes. It's great to still get those insights, but having the data that can't be questioned because it is a metric is really, really useful information. And we did a presentation at Autodesk University at the end of last year on real-time data analysis, and we won an award for that class. So I think everybody's really interested in this space, but the opportunity is massive in terms of understanding what the models are doing, what your users are doing, and the competency of those users, and really the health of the entire business. So the question that we always get asked is, how do you deal with Big Brother? This is potentially pretty scary that you're capturing all of this data. So we always want to show that the intent of Bimbeats is not to apportion blame. It's not to check up on people who are doing the wrong thing. It's about reinforcing a positive message that Bimbeats is here to identify opportunities to give people time back, essentially. And that's what we're finding with 95% of our cases are when we identify that something's wrong, it's an opportunity to help that person, help the project, or help the business. But it also allows us to identify people who may not be exposed for the great work that they're doing. So if you have someone quietly working away, automating routines, and no one knows about it, like, we can now go, that's awesome. How can we recognize that and reward that person, but also scale that across the entire business? And it really just provides that full transparency by saying, we're going to share all of this with everybody. And it isn't about focusing on individuals or someone comparing themselves against someone else. It's about using this as an opportunity to take a point of where you are right now, measure where you're at now, and then say, right, let's set a goal to be better next year. And then we can measure that through Bimbeats. So who owns the data is very important, and how secure the data is. We don't own the data unless you allow us to. We don't see your data unless you allow us to. And you can either store your data on your own database, or you can let us manage it for you. It's entirely up to you. And we're fully GDPR compliant, which in Europe is pretty stringent set of rules around what you can and can't send data to publicly. So we're fully approved for all of that, which is really important. So with that, I'll hand back to Matt. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I see we have some questions there. So what we might do is I will get Matt to answer some of those questions. But if anyone has any other questions, please email us to info@h2ktechnology.com.au and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Again, thanks everybody for your time this morning, and I appreciate Matt what you've done. Yeah, there's one question, we could get that answered right now for you. Thanks everybody.
Well, there is a question from Jason, and I'm not surprised because Jason has been speaking to us for a while now. And Reviz2, yes, we actually introduced a beta version of Reviz2 on Jason's request just before Built this year. So yes, we do have a beta version, and we're more than happy to work with you, Jason, on working out what value you want to get from that, and having a look at what we've got currently within the beta of Reviz2. And on the subject of new software that we're bringing in, we're in the process of writing an Enscape integration as well. So that was one of the client requests this year. So that is currently in alpha and testing internally, but that will be launched hopefully by the end of the year as well. So thanks for your question, Jason. And one-click LCA, we haven't got that on the roadmap yet, but again, we're willing to talk to you and understand exactly what you want to capture from that.